All right. Hello, everyone. Hello, Andrew.
Hello.
Um, you wanted to have a conversation about evolution.
Yeah. Yeah, I know your main subject is abiogenesis, but I guess I want to see how much you knew about uh other topics in evolution.
Okay. So,
Um,
is there some specifics that you would like to talk about?
are you familiar with the concepts related to the field of Evo Devo or evolutionary development?
Yes.
Okay. That's kind of why I wanted to talk about if that's all right.
Okay.
Um, so I guess what are your thoughts on the subject initially? Like, I guess overall thoughts.
Well, would you like that I show you something from my library in regards of that subject specifically?
Okay, sure.
Just give me a minute, okay? So I have here an article. Um, How do biological multicellular complexity and a spatially organized body plan emerge? So I suppose that this would be tangible to that topic. Okay,
Okay.
let me just. Okay. Okay, I am listing here 17 different things that, in my understanding, are necessary to explain organismal form, which depends on explaining how organs, tissues, and cells form and gain shape. On the lowest level of the hierarchy, the formation of cells in a multicellular organism depends on the specification of these 17 different things. So we are talking here just about the specification of each single cell. Um, I don't know if you are familiar with this concept. Would you like that I read them one by one? Would you like that we go over them? Do you have some completely different ideas in regards of what is required to make specific cells?
Like during development, you mean?
Yes, in regards to specify each single cell in a multicellular organism. I mean, if you want to understand and explain it, you need to start with the smallest unit, which would be each cell. And we know that, for example, in regards of humans, we have about 200 different cells, right?
Right. Yeah. Types of cells. Yeah.
Yeah. So in order to have them, you need to specify them, correct?
Right.
So I
Yeah.
am listing,
Cell differentiation. Yeah. Yeah. That would make
yes.
sense.
Okay, so I am listing here 17 different mechanisms which are involved in the specification and making the different cells in a multicellular organism.
Okay.
Okay,
Um.
so this is a very, very complex issue. I think maybe in all sciences, I would say that the development of multicellular organisms, I can't imagine something more complex. This is a very, very complex topic.
Yeah. I guess the point we may disagree on is that um complexity may or may not be indicative of design in this case. Would you agree? Like, I mean, I know you would see complexity in terms of design, and sorry if I'm straying from the topic here. I guess what I want to talk about specifically is how can not necessarily how this development can be used to generate changes in living organisms, if that makes sense.
In my
So-
understanding, you require pre-programmed instructional assembly information on a gene level and also on an epigenetic level. And I don't think that just natural mechanisms are sufficient to explain biodiversity.
Okay, and what mechanisms would be sufficient in your view?
As I said, I can put up another paper here where I list it. Okay, just a minute.
Also, while you're doing that, I would like to say thanks for having me on and letting us have this first discussion between you and I.
Sure. Okay, I will read that. I think this is relevant. The big umbrella contributor to explain organismal complexity and biodiversity, which falsifies and replaces unguided evolutionary mechanisms, is pre-programmed, prescribed instructional complex information encoded through at least 33 variations of genetic codes and 41 epigenetic codes. Complex communication networks use signaling that act on a structural level in an integrated, interlocked fashion, which is pre-programmed to direct growth, nutrition demands, environmental cues, control reproduction, homeostasis, metabolism, defense systems, and cell death. So this is in short terms, basically explaining my view on what I think replaces evolution.
And I guess the question I might ask is, why does it replace evolution? Because, I
think that the central ingredient which is missing or lacking in evolution is intelligence. And when I say that the information which we see in organisms has to be pre-programmed and prescribed and instructional, then that means that a guiding intelligence had to be involved in order to infuse that information in organisms in order for they to be able to be multicellular and also to adapt to the environment, to survive, basically.
Right, and I think I and probably other more qualified individuals like evolutionary biologists would see this as that you don't necessarily need to explain how the system came about to see how the system can generate these changes. And so I'm more specifically interested in how you think these changes can't result in different body plans over long periods of time.
Well, I believe that the Genesis account is true. I believe that God created the all biological systems and life.
And
in 6 literal days, all life adapted to the environment. And if that is not there right from the beginning, then life would not be able to perpetuate.
Wait, are you saying God is necessary for life to reproduce? I'm not quite following.
No, what I am saying is that all life forms require mechanisms to be able to adapt to the environment and to speciate. And that has to be also pre-programmed. And if that would not be there right from the beginning when life began, then life would not be able to perpetuate. So these mechanisms to adapt, they have to be pre-programmed.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that we may differ on this, but I don't think there's necessarily a program per se. I think it's more interactions that determine how the organism develops, because it's not like a blueprint basically. It's more this system over here influences this system, which influences this system, which influences the original system, which so on and so forth. So it's kind of a feedback mechanism, and if you tweak that mechanism, then you can get different changes. Like I provide an example. Oh, are you there? I can't hear you.
Yes, I'm there.
Okay. So for example, there's one recent example that I've looked at is you have these proteins. Specifically, there's this regulatory protein called gremlin, which I believe inhibits apoptosis from occurring in the cells, basically in the tissues. And what you have in ducks, so waterfowl, for instance, is you have variations on where gremlin is expressed. For instance, you can have gremlin now expressed in the hind feet, basically, and now it inhibits programmed cell death of the webbing between the toes of the hind feet. So now you have uh, now you have ducks and waterfowl with webbed hind feet, basically. And I know we would disagree on what that accounts or amounts to, but I think that if a minor change like that can be the result of these developmental mechanisms, then I don't see any reason to suspect why it couldn't change other morphological structures, is my point.
There right from the beginning. And I have a link on regards of that. I can put it in the side chat. And then people can look it up. It is clear from the foregoing that apoptosis is an essential physiological mechanism and as such would have been present in the pre-fall world. However, as some of the above examples show, some apoptosis pathways are also triggered as a toxicological reaction. Thus, they are vital to an organism's health, even survival during exposure to pathogenic microorganisms or environmental stress. The thing is that in development, cells they need to die at the right moment, and in order for you to have development, you need to have apoptosis fully working right from the beginning, and that requires sophisticated signaling mechanisms. And if they are not there, you cannot have apoptosis, and consequently, you cannot have development.
Right, or well, like that doesn't really address anything I said though, because I showed an example of how you can tweak that system and get change. So development doesn't have to be fully functional right from the start, or not fully functional, but like it doesn't have to be a certain way from the start of an embryonic growth. Basically, it can be modified.
Well, the thing is that you need the signaling pathways, the communication pathways, which say to the cell, "Hey, it's time now that you die."
Right. Are we? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I think we're cutting out. Well, can you repeat what you said, please?
Right from the set which we to go into self-destruction. And this is an orchestrated process during development, which has to be there right from the beginning. And if you don't have it, you cannot have development. So this is, in my understanding, an all or nothing business. Either you have the signaling pathways and the proteins which are required for the cell to trigger apoptosis right from the beginning. And if you don't have that, you cannot have development of a multicellular.
Oh, you're cutting off a little bit.
Have you heard what I said, or was it cut it out?
It's cutting off here and there. It might be on my end, but I don't know.
Did you hear what I said, which was my last sentence?
Yeah, I think I did. Yeah, I heard what you say.
Okay, yeah. So gradually.
Can you repeat that? Sorry, it cut off there.
Yes, in my understanding, apoptosis is something that could not have evolved gradually. It is an all or nothing business where the signaling pathways had to be there right from the beginning. And so also the proteins which trigger apoptosis, like caspases and so forth. This is a very complex process, which I cannot imagine how that could have emerged gradually through evolution. Actually, it goes against evolution because evolution is for survival, but apoptosis is self-destruction. It's exactly the opposite, and it is a pre-programmed process. It is directed through signaling. It requires information.
Right. Well, I would say that if some of your cells die and that helps the organism in survival, I wouldn't say that's detrimental to survival. I would say that that's the I lost my train of thought. But anyway, someone in the chat put it well. CRISPR said it isn't about the origin of apoptosis, but the regulation of it. I think that's what I'm talking about as well. We may be talking past each other when you're talking about the origin of these processes. I'm more so talking about how they can lead to evolution. So new body plans essentially.
Yes, what I am saying is that in order for you to have development, I mean, multicellular organisms, that is a pre-requirement that you have apoptosis, because during development, cells, they have to die and be replaced with other cells. And
right, and I won't agree. I won't disagree with that.
I don't know how this. You can disagree. I mean, if you have a counter argument, I have an article here in regards of that, and basically, what I am saying is that you need these four things here together, which is specialization, stigmergy, polymorphic messaging, and apoptosis. This works together. And if you don't have it together, basically it is irreducibly complex, then you cannot have one without the other.
And so then a deity must have designed it. Is that your argument?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Well, I
Exactly.
would.
I'll put here the
Well, like
side
if
effect. So, um,
well, I would say that if this is, I would agree this is an open question. That's why people are studying it, and
I
I
would
don't.
not say that it is. Go ahead.
Oh no, no, go ahead. I was done.
I mean, if you want, we can read this article together and then you can make your comments if you like. It is about apoptosis.
Okay. Or I guess or may I ask a question first, which would
Yeah,
be,
sure.
um, do sponges, like according to your knowledge, do sponges and other colonial organisms, do they have programmed cell death? I mean,
I
that
don't know now. I don't know right now. I would have to Google it.
okay. Yeah, I would say that if we're talking about multicellularity, then that could be an intermediate stage. And if we do find out that they don't have apoptosis, then that could show that your irreducibly complex system isn't always the case. But go ahead with the article.
Okay, let me read here. If each cell in our face were to undergo just one more cell division, we would be considered horribly malformed. If each cell in our arms underwent just one more round of cell division, we could tie our shoelaces without bending over. How do our cells know when to stop dividing? Our arms are generally the same size on both sides of the body. How is cell division so tightly regulated? A person's right and left legs almost always end up the same length, and the hearts of mice and elephants each fit the proper rib cage. How genes set limits on cell size and number continues to mystify. One of the remaining fundamental mysteries in biology is how organs and organisms were programmed to stop growing at the right time. This cessation or near cessation of growth does not occur abruptly, but rather is the end result of a progressive decline in growth rate. It is difficult to examine conception, the division of cells, and the transition from zygote to the fetus and not see a rigorous and meticulous series of patterns that begin to emerge. If random occurrence and simple chaotic incidents had been the cause for human life, one could expect a far greater number of genetic mutations.
Where
And anomalies and aberrations. The symmetry of the human body from conception to birth is overwhelming, and it is extremely unlikely that random occurrence is responsible. A variety of genes are involved in the control of cell growth and division. The cell cycle is the cell's way of replicating itself in an organized step-by-step fashion. This cycle of duplication and division, known as the cell cycle, is the essential mechanism by which all living things reproduce. The duplication of eukaryotic cells is an all finely tuned biochemical process that depends on the precise structural arrangement of the cellular components. The only way to make a new cell, is to duplicate a cell that already exists. Tight regulation of this process ensures that dividing cell's DNA is copied properly, any errors in the DNA are repaired, and each daughter cell receives a full set of chromosomes. The cycle has checkpoints, also called restriction points, which allow certain genes to check for problems and hold the cycle for repairs if something goes wrong. A minimal number of cell cycle regulators are required, which makes them irreducibly complex. Why would a prebiotic soup, or let's suppose life, begin with simple cells which divide by fission, produce any of these regulators without the others, if by themselves, without the others, there is no function for them? So what would you answer to that question?
Well, I would say that we're not talking about abio here, though. Like we're
Yes, let's suppose that you would have already life going. You would have bacteria, okay?
okay.
So how do you go from there to make the mitosis, meiosis, and getting these checkpoints, and if these regulators, if they are irreducible, how do I mean? Either you, I think there are 16 regulators which are employed to regulate and check the cell cycle in order that it performs its cycle correctly. And if one of these is missing, you have not a functional cell cycle. So how do you go from a cell that doesn't have that cell cycle, which eventually replicates by fission, to one that uses mitosis, if you need all the regulators at once?
Well, like are all these regulators found in other animals? I don't think they are.
I think all life forms which have the cell cycle and mitosis, they have these checkpoints and regulators, and you need them all at once. I have a table. I can look it up for you.
But do they have all the same 16? Is my question. Are they all the same?
There is a minimal number which is required, and they are irreducible. Let me put them here. Just a minute. Okay. "16 cell cycle regulators are essential. If one is missing, the cell cycle is not completed. Therefore, the regulation of the cell cycle is irreducibly complex."
In humans, or is this all life, or I don't see a second.
Mitotic cell division is the most fundamental task of all living cells. Cells have intricate and tightly regulated machinery to ensure that mitosis occurs with appropriate frequency and high fidelity. According to the third tenet of cell theory, new cells originate only from other living cells. The process by which this occurs is called cell division. For a multicellular organism, such as a human oak or an oak tree, countless divisions of a cell zygote produce an organism of astonishing cellular complexity and organization. Cell division does not stop with the formation of the mature organism, but continues in certain tissues throughout life. So, yeah, you need a minimal set of cell regulators in order for that cell cycle to occur properly. And how do you account for all of them if one individually has no function, if you need all the others in order to have a proper cell cycle?
On cell cycle specifically, I don't know. I haven't done research in this specifically, but I think this isn't really relevant to like these cycle regulators during mitosis. How does that prevent the evolution of new forms if we both agreed that results in reproduction? Like we both agreed that the cell cycle is not perfect, right? That
well, the thing is, evolution would have to account also for the origin of the cell cycle itself. And
why?
how do you? Well, what other mechanism would you suppose, if not if you exclude design?
I'm not excluding design.
Okay, so in that regards, we are in agreement. I believe that God was required to make up the cell cycle because these regulators had to merge all together in order to work in a joint venture.
Oh, okay. What evidence is there for that?
Well, the precise fact that if you have a smaller number or not a sufficient number of regulators, you cannot complete the cell cycle, you cannot have cell division, and you cannot have perpetuation of life.
And why is that evidence for a designer?
Well, because evolution would come up with just one or two non-functional regulators because they would not provide a functional cell cycle. You need, I think, I mean, my source says you require 16, but let's even suppose that you would require only 10 or 8. I mean, a minimal number of regulators is required to have a functional cell cycle. And how do you account for that by evolutionary pressures if a cell would not be able to duplicate if you don't have a functional cell cycle?
I don't know, but the scientists figure it out.
Did they? Well, so let me give you a homework. Provide me a science paper which explains how the cell cycle regulators emerged by evolutionary mechanisms.
I'm not saying they did figure it out. I'm saying they are currently figuring it out, and that's okay. They're looking into it.
Yeah. Okay. So we can say it is an open question, but for me, it is not an open question because if it is it's the same thing as to have a machine which is only working properly if you have all the parts joined together in the right way, and if all the parts are there. If all parts are not there, you have no function. And we know only of intelligence and uh, uh, minds which are able to make complex multi-part machines, and we have no example of unguided random events with foresight which you require in order to come up with such complex systems. So I think this is clear evidence of design.
Where are you saying evolution is random? Because it
No,
isn't.
I'm
Or are
not
you saying
saying.
AI was
No,
random?
no, I'm not saying that it is random, Andrew. What I am saying is that let's suppose, even that by some ecological pressures, evolution would come up with one cell cycle regulator. Well, one cell cycle regulator will not be sufficient to have a functional cell cycle.
Right, and I
I
would.
mean, I can read again for you. In the information which I have, 16 cell cycle regulators are essential. If one is missing, the cell cycle is not completed. So what happens if the cell cycle is not completed? You have no perpetuation of life.
Right.
So, in my understanding, in order to have all the parts in a functional way working together, evolution is not an adequate explanation, in my understanding.
How do you know it's not an adequate explanation if we haven't figured it out yet?
Well, as I am just explaining you, and I can give you an analogy. Let's suppose
Okay.
that you want to have a machine for a specific purpose, okay? And only the functional uh, set of all subunits working in a joint venture together give you that function. And these subunits must be joined together in the correct manner, and they must fit together like a lock and key. We see that in proteins, we see that in many biological systems. Okay, so why would evolution make a subunit, a protein, or a regulator, which by itself has no function.
Well, I mean, that's not always how evolution works, though. This is not always adding one thing at a time.
So how does it work then?
Well, usually it works by collection. I mean, you're taking something from over here and something from over there and putting them together in a new way. It's not adding them one step at a time like a staircase.
Yeah, see, this is the problem which I see, and I can give you an example, and I can make you an analogy, okay? Let's suppose that you want to have a photovoltaic system, okay? And the photovoltaic system, in order to store energy, requires 5 parts which work in an interdependent manner together. And you need to start with the solar panels, and then in the end of the chain, you need the battery, okay? So the solar panel by itself has no function, right? Send the electricity to the battery in order to be stored, and then it can be used, right?
Wait, you're saying it has no function whatsoever?
Well, we don't make solar panels for any other purpose than to catch photons and solar energy, right?
Right, that's one function. How that's the function we're doing. But like that's
Okay,
not
so,
the
but we
only
wouldn't,
function it could have.
yeah, but we wouldn't make solar panels for another function, right?
Just because we can't make we don't make them that way doesn't mean they can't have that function.
Now,
Like,
what
yeah,
I am saying is that if your purpose and end goal is to make a photovoltaic system to store energy, okay? So what you do, you conceptualize the system, you put it on the drawing table what you need, and when you have all the drawings and instructions how to make the single part, then it goes to the factory for fabrication, right?
right.
Okay. So you wouldn't make those solar energy and then be able to be utilized for electrical energy, right? I mean, you wouldn't make a solar panel to be used as a table, for example.
I mean, you could use it that way.
You could use it that way, but would you construct the solar panel to use it as a table?
No,
Right. So
but
you would,
that's besides the point though, because it therefore has more than one function.
well, but you would not sit on the drawing table and conceptualize solar panels to catch energy, solar energy, and then you'd use it as a table, right?
Right, but that's not how evolution is believed to work.
I will get there if you follow my reasoning. So you would only construct solar panels with the goal to have a functional photovoltaic system in the end, right?
Sure.
Okay. So in order to make solar panels, you require very complex factories with different machines, which is a very complex gradual process. And in order to make these factories and these machines, you require also instructional information, right?
Okay.
So now this is a perfect analogy to what we see in photosynthesis, because photosynthesis, the first step is you require chlorophyll. And chlorophyll has exactly the same function as a solar panel. It captures photons, solar energy. Okay?
Right, but like its current function is not the same as it's always been. Like like like
How do you
like
know
you're
that?
because we can well, like, I don't know chlorophyll specifically, but we know of similar irreducibly complex systems with components that came from somewhere else with different functions.
Okay, so I give you another job, Andrew. If you come eventually again to my stream, figure out what other kind of functions that chlorophyll can perform. Or if you think that there are simpler systems which then became chlorophylls, what these simpler systems, what function they perform. But let me come to the point. In order to make chlorophylls, you need 17 proteins, and 7 of these proteins, they are only exclusively used in the synthesis pathway to make chlorophylls. And I can give you the information for that. So my question is, in the same manner as nobody would make a factory to make solar panels, but then the solar panels would have only function if you have all the other parts of the photovoltaic system in order in the end to store energy. Why would life or evolution produce complex enzymes which would then make chlorophylls, and these chlorophylls would have no function unless they are embedded in the antenna complex, which captures photons, which then are funneled to the reaction center, and then it goes into the electron transport chain to fool and to make ATP. There would be no function for these chlorophylls. And there would be no function for these proteins individually. And as I said, in that pathway of 17 proteins in the biosynthesis pathway to make chlorophylls, the last 7 enzymes, they are not known to be used in any other biosynthesis pathway, or they do not perform any other function whatsoever.
Okay, can I use an analogy perhaps?
Go ahead.
So say I take a piece of paper, okay? So it's something that can be modified over time. So you have this piece of paper, and you can obviously write on it. So that's one function. Now that's its current function, but I can also fold it up, and make a paper airplane, for instance, or I can make any other kind of shape that could give a specific purposeful function, basically. And to me at least, that's the same thing in biology, for instance. Like what it has today is not the same as what it used to have, or at least what it does in homologous sequences and homologous organisms. Like you can have a protein in one organism do this, but you can have the same protein, like for example, you can have different eye designs from the same protein, or you can have different or you can have the same design from different proteins, for instance. Like that's convergent evolution. So
I made actually a video on photosynthesis and why I believe that it is irreducibly complex. And if it is of your interest, we can have a look, and I can stop and you can comment on it. And it says basically what I just said to you, that these 7 proteins of the 17 to make chlorophyll, they are not known to be used in any other pathway than that pathway. So what do you make out of this?
well, I can I can see what I can find online right now, and sure, you can pull it up.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay.
To be honest, I have it already here, but I can look up with you individually each of these enzymes, and you will see that what they say is basically that these enzymes are just used in that pathway.
Right. Or okay, so let me grant you a hypothetical then. So if by chance we can explain this due to evolution, which I'm skeptical of that claim, but say we can't explain this using evolutionary theory, what then?
Well, of course, evolution doesn't deny uh, God's existence. Of course, God could use evolution to make complex systems, right?
Right, but let's say that evolution can't explain the system hypothetically. What do we do then? What what
Well,
conclusion do we
I
draw?
would use eliminative induction, which means that if you have just two possible explanations and one explanation is not sound, then the other must be true, even if you don't completely understand how and why.
Well, there's a false premise there, because how do you know there's only two explanations?
Well, I mean, do you know of any other possible explanation? I mean, in order to explain biodiversity, if God is not involved, then you have just mindless natural mechanisms. And if it is not evolution, then you would have to resort to random chance, which is even
Right, but
a worse
well,
situation for materialistic.
right. Well. First of all, that's it's not random, and second of all,
No, I didn't
I
say it's random, but if you say it wasn't evolution, what other possible mechanisms do you have? If you don't have evolution, intelligent design, what else remains? In my understanding, there would be just two possible alternatives. One would be random chance, and the other would be physical necessity.
right, but you avoided my question, because I said, how do you know that there are only two explanations? How do you know there isn't a third one in the middle, or a fourth one, or any other possible explanation?
Well, either there is intelligence involved or intelligence is not involved. Period.
Why?
And if you and
How
if
do
you
you know that for sure?
Well,
Like,
I think this is an exhaustive set. If you know of other possibilities, well, be my guest and mention them.
well, I don't, but the burden of proof is on you to justify why there aren't any.
Well, I think this is logical. Either there is intelligence or there is no intelligence. What else could be a possible mechanism to instantiate complex systems?
I don't know. Let's figure it out.
Well, I don't think there
That's
is.
what science does.
Well, I don't think there is something else to be figured out. I think we have
How do
here
you know that?
a, by logic.
Logic by itself is not sufficient in science.
Well, okay. I say that there are just basically two possible mechanisms. One is where intelligence was involved, and another where intelligence was not involved. I think this is, ontologically speaking, a complete set of possibilities. And I don't think I have to substantiate this further. But if you disagree, then be my guest and mention another possible mechanism.
Well, for instance, could it be both? Could it be neither, or could it be something we haven't thought of yet that our brains can't comprehend yet? This is kind
Well,
of
why should we stick to something that we cannot comprehend? And then I would say, what we can assert without evidence, we can dismiss without evidence.
well, I'm saying that if we can't comprehend it, then we're basically saying we don't know. We need to look deeper into the problem. We can't just say we don't know, therefore we're assuming this other explanation.
Well,
So,
I
for
don't
example,
think
if we know,
I don't think this is reasonable. I
well,
don't think this is reasonable, Andrew.
well, like
I mean,
say for instance, if
we
we
know,
find evolution,
if that would be the same thing if, let's suppose, we would arrive on Mars, and there we would see a complex factory, and it is there is nobody there using it, but it's just there. And then you have three possible explanations. Either there was an alien life form which constructed that factory on Mars. The second possibility would be that random chance and just the environment on Mars would have constructed that factory. And the third would be, oh, there is some kind of unknown mechanism which constructed that factory. What would you think would be the best explanation of that factory on Mars?
well, I would answer that with a question, or to clarify something in this example, do we have any evidence of an intelligence there besides just the factory's existence?
Well, we can make a logical inference based on the evidence. It's the same as Sherlock Holmes arrives at the crime scene. He sees a dead body with a bullet in the chest, and then he has to find out what happened. And of course,
Right,
if he
but
has
we need other
if
pieces
there
of
is a
evidence in order to make
bullet
that claim.
in the chest,
Like
yeah, you have the evidence, which is the dead body with the bullet in the chest. And
right, well, or like you see, you see, for instance, that this factory exists, and that's it. That by itself is not an indication of an intelligence by itself. Like you need other pieces of evidence. Like,
well, but
that's
if by all your previous experience, you know only of intelligent beings capable of instantiating factories for specific purposes, why should it not be logical to come to that conclusion if you just see the factory but you don't know who made it?
okay. Wait, repeat the question one more time. I'm sorry.
I give another example. Let's suppose you go to a parking plot, and there you see a car made by Ford. And right next to that car, you would see another car, but you would not have any indication whatsoever which company that made that car. Would you infer that a company, another company with intelligent engineers and so forth, made that other car? Or would you say, oh, I have no clue?
Well, in that case, we have prior evidence that something did make the car. In life, we
Good.
don't have that example.
Well, the
So,
thing is that we see in life devices which we see in the macro world, but in a microscopic scale,
Such as?
like cell factories, molecular machines, turbines, neurons, which are computers, circuits like metabolic pathways.
Those are analogous to things in the macro world, but they're not exact.
Yes, they're analogous. So if you see a phenomenon, which is
You're cutting out there. Sorry.
So if you see something which is analogous, I mean, I can read that to you, and I think this is something which is logical. If the analogy of two phenomena be very close and striking, while at the same time the cause of one is very obvious, it becomes scarcely possible to refuse to admit the action of an analogous cause in the other, tough not so obvious in itself. And the metaphor, a biological cell is like a production system, demonstrates that similar behaviors are driven by similar causal mechanisms.
Okay.
Michael Denton, he said, the inference to design is a purely posteriori induction based on a root.
Well, I can say that a puddle in the sidewalk, or a puddle of water in the street, and a lake are analogous because they both contain water. But obviously, we may or may not say that they have the same cause, or for instance, you can have probably other things that have analogous properties. That doesn't mean they have the same cause. Analogous properties by itself is not sufficient in science. Like, you need exact measurements and evidence for that. You need independent lines of evidence.
So what if you don't have that? Because we are talking here about events that supposedly happened either thousands or billions of years ago, and we do not have a time machine to go back and see actually how it happened. So you have to work. So you have to work from the evidence that we have at
Right, exactly.
hand. Saying that in the cell, the genome is is basically the CPU where you have all the information stored to make the cell, and it directs the making of everything that is needed.
Are you
all the things which I mentioned previously. Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. So I think okay. I think what we're talking about is kind of unrelated to evolution. So did you want to?
It is. It is related, and I will explain you why. All systems in biology, they are basically directed by instructional information, which is stored either in the genome or through epigenetic information system and signaling networks. And you have to account for the emergence of these systems. And if you want to posit evolution, then how do you do that? Because there is a relationship between information directing the making of complex machines. And we know only of intelligence which is capable to have foresight, knowing what is required there in the future and how to instantiate that, first making a blueprint, which then directs the making of these things. And that is analogously to what we see in life. And in complex multicellular organisms, where you have a multitude of information systems which direct the making of each single cell and then complex organisms and organs and so forth. So it is analogous to what we do, basically. And we don't know how non-intelligent mechanisms could have foresight to instantiate all these things, and even that relationship of information instructing the making and operation of complex machines.
Right. Well, or like what you just said there. That's an argument from ignorance, because you're saying
No, it's
we
no,
don't
it's no,
know
no,
how
it's a,
this
no,
is.
it's no, it's not an argument from ignorance, because we know by experience that we as intelligent beings, we are capable to instantiate blueprints and information and instruct how to make complex machines and factories. So we have an example, and we know that it works because we can do it. As intelligent humans, we instantiate these things. So saying that an analogous situation in life um, must have most probably a similar cause is not based on ignorance, but based on knowledge, based on our own experience.
Okay. All right. So let's say, for instance, that we know how the star, or sorry, how the chemical composition of the Earth works, and we can heat it up. Okay, and it's going to show these absorption lines in the spectra. Okay, now we see those same spectral lines in the sun. Does that mean we say that the sun is made of the same elements as the Earth?
Well, you're giving now a completely different example, which has nothing to do with what I just said. Because
How
what I am
so?
saying is, because what I am saying is that you have to account for the complex information storage and transmission systems, and for the language which is used in life. And that is the genetic code and over 40 different epigenetic codes and languages. That's what you have to account for. How did all these things emerge? And
Right. Well. Like it's the same problem though, because we see analogous property in this structure, we see analogous property in this other structure. Does that mean that they are the same? That they have the same uh, cause? For instance, like does the sun and the earth have the same uh, structure and cause? For instance.
now what you need to do right now, Andrew, is to think, okay, we know that intelligence is able to instantiate information storing and transmission systems which direct the making of complex machines and factories. If I want to posit that in nature such a system emerged by non-intelligent mechanisms, how do you do that?
How do you explain complexity and with non-intelligence?
Not only complexity, but information storage and transmission systems like the
Define information.
genome and the entire machinery which transcribes and translate the information in the genome to make proteins.
The define the information so we're not uh talking past each other here.
Okay, as information, I say that the specified and complex sequence of nucleotides in the genome, in chromosomes, directs the specific sequence of amino acids, which then bear function by the precise fold into which these amino acids and polypeptide chains fold, and this folding bears then functionality. The proteins, they become functional in order to perform specific tasks in the cell.
That's a description of what information does. That's not a definition of what information is. I'm sorry.
Well, the information is the precise sequence in the genome.
Okay, so computers don't have information then?
Well, the software stored in the hard disk is the information, and it's analogous to what we see in the genome and in the epigenetic information.
Right, it's analogous. It's not the same. It's not exact. That's my point. Like, do computers reproduce?
It is exact in the sense that, for example, I can invent an AutoCAD program and use it to make an architecture plan to make codon words in the genome, which is the language used in biology, in life, to construct messages which then direct the making of proteins. So it is analogous, but in the same sense, we can use actually the genome actually to store information for our usage. And Microsoft and other companies, they are attempting to do that. They are attempting to get there, because what we see in life is far more complex and sophisticated than anything that we have ever invented so far.
And what's the information we're storing? Like what is the information?
It is instructional assembly information which directs the making of proteins. It directs the making of non-coding RNAs, which then are used for different specific functions in the cell, like directing the expression of the genome and other functions.
Right, but that definition only applies to life in that sense. It doesn't apply to all the other examples you gave.
I don't understand what you want to say with that.
Well,
we have to account for the origin of that information, Andrew, and that is the big crux of the issue. While by evolution, the claim is that allele differentiation and so forth provided change and different alleles, and then somehow that added information in the genome, and that provided new features which then spread it in the population. But how do you go from a bacteria to man? I mean, we are talking here about supposedly 4 billion years or 3.5 billion years where there were unicellular organisms. And now we have a human organism with 37 trillion cells. And while the simplest bacteria has a genome of about 1.3 million nucleotides, we have 3 billion nucleotides, but our cell hosts 2.3 billion proteins, and our organism has 37 trillion cells, which are organized and arranged in a fantastically organized and functional manner. And I mean, you can calculate how many mutations and increase of size and number would have occurred in 4 billion years, and you would see that there would not be enough time to account for the complexity which we see. And I'm talking just about humans, but we would have to ask about all life forms, about millions of different life forms.
So the size of the genome needs to increase. So that's the increase in information.
Well, not only the size of the genome, but the genome alone cannot account for the complexity, for example, of the human organism. Since we have 37 trillion cells, you need lots and lots of epigenetic information as well, which directs and instructs not only the making of the differentiation of each cell, but each cell, specific cells, they have to be in a specific place in the body, and that has to be instructed as well. And that is not only genetic, but epigenetic information which goes into play, and also signaling networks on several levels. How do you get there? Because you need at least 4. Yeah.
Or that's why I provided examples of how those systems can change and evolve over time. Like another example, changes in, let's see, I can't think right now. Well, like for instance, you can have modifications to genes in the finger bones of bats, for instance, and you can have the elongation of those fingers, and now you have the foundation of what I assume we would call a new structure, which would be wings, because then you can, after that, you can have the membranous skin components become part of that structure, and now you have a wing.
Well, when I see these narratives, Andrew, it is always far, far too simplistic.
Well, yes, but that's where we start off with. That's what we base it off of, and then we see how complex it becomes over time.
Well, as I told you before, in order to have just one specific cell, you need to specify all the
Right, and we went over those mechanisms.
There are
cells
17
changing.
different things here. Well, the thing is that you cannot simply change, because you need entire new different information systems which are irreducible. You need the information storage system, you need the language, you need the information itself, which you store through the language in the hard disk, in the information storage device, and you need the information transmission system. You need all these four parts together. Otherwise, you cannot have new information systems. How do you go to get 41 different epigenetic codes and information systems and signaling networks? You have to, this all has to emerge. And this is irreducible. Either if you don't have all the four, you don't have a new information system which can direct new features in biology.
So something becoming more irreducibly complex is new information?
Or what I am saying is that, let's suppose that you want to have the information in histones, and you require the histone code. What do you need? You need the histone tail, you need readers, writers, and erasers, and you need the sequences in the histone tail, the amino acid sequence very specifically, and you need these readers and writers to understand actually what is written on these. It's like a barcode, okay? It's like a barcode where you need the devices which can actually read and understand the information then there, and they direct the orchestration of the expression of genes. So if you don't have that all together, if you have the histones, if you have the histone tail, if you have the histone tail sequence, which is informational, but you don't have the readers, then the information has no function.
Okay, so if I may ask a question, so if you were to take the Hox genes that specify or help in the growth of, say, eyes or legs, for instance, and you transplant them from say a mouse, the genes from a mouse to a fly, for instance, and they work the same way, or what are your thoughts on that, for instance?
Well, same design, same principles. You can use the Hox, the homeobox, and so forth, and there is a sequence of a body plan which is used as same principles. That means for me similar design, And it's not only the Hox and homeobox information which is required for body plans. There is also morphogenes and many different
Of course,
other
yeah.
different mechanisms which specify the body plan. And as I am saying, this is an orchestration of several different information systems working in a joint venture together.
So you mentioned similar design, for instance, but like, how does that? Why should we expect these commonalities, and in particular this nested set of commonalities, between organisms, if common design were true, whereas we do have an expectation of that from common descent, for instance?
Well, common descent is just a hypothesis. I don't think that it has been instantiated and that it would be
No.
true.
Answer my question. Answer my question.
It is a hypothesis as in as much as common design.
No, they're not equally likely, because common descent has a mechanism to generate this nested hierarchy pattern, but common design does not. We do not expect something from that.
Well, first of all, you would have to account for homeobox genes and how did the right sequence of the expression of these genes emerge in the first place, where you have a functional body where all the members are at the right place.
How is that related to what I just said? Like, I'm talking about the
Well,
nested
because
hierarchy.
I understand, but before that you even talk about nested hierarchies, you need to explain how homeobox genes emerged in the first place and how the right sequence of body plans could have emerged in an unguided manner.
No, no. The mechanisms of evolution are completely separate from the idea of common descent. You don't need to posit a specific mechanism of evolution like
Okay,
natural selection,
okay. What I am
like that.
saying is that common design is in as much a valid hypothesis as common descent.
But why should we expect a nested hierarchy from common design, though? That's my question.
Uh, I don't know. I've not thought about that question.
Right, exactly. So they are not valid. They are not equally likely. They do not have the same merits.
Well, first of all, I asked you some time ago in the side chat, demonstrate to me a nested hierarchy of oxygenic photosynthesis. And I can advance to you that you won't find any because there isn't any known. So how do you even explain oxygenic photosynthesis by evolution? You can't. And even Robert Blankenship, which is one of the foremost authorities on the subject, has confessed that he has no explanation how evolution could account for oxygenic photosynthesis. And we are talking here about a process which supposedly emerged very early in the evolutionary timeline, about 3.5 billion years ago, right after life started. And if you actually study oxygenic photosynthesis, it is one of the most complex systems, biological systems known. So how do you account for that by evolution? You have the most complex systems right at the beginning of the evolutionary timeline.
Well, like that. If we have a discrepancy in this nested hierarchy on photosynthesis, that doesn't diminish the fact of nested hierarchies, for probably dozens of other traits between the different kingdoms of life, for instance.
Can this is the intelligent design a possible explanation?
Yes, it is possible. It's not
Okay.
equally likely.
Okay, so I would say if you don't have the explanation for just one system, then intelligent design is a more likely and more plausible explanation. Because I can always say that if there is nested hierarchy, God could have made it so. But
Why?
you cannot, because he can do it. Intelligence can instantiate nested hierarchy. There is no reason
I'm
why
not
it
asking
couldn't.
about I'm not asking about how he did it or why it's possible. Why should we expect that from a common designer, namely God?
Well, I don't know his motivations, why he created in a certain way and not in another.
Then you don't
Okay,
have a
so
valid model.
well, I don't need to have explanations in regards of all the motivations why God created and
Why
how
not?
and why he created the way he did. I mean, I don't have to know why he created lions rather than not, or why he created the other kind of animals rather than not. I don't have an answer to all these questions, but
So
one
then we
thing
don't
is
need an explanation
one,
for
one
photosynthesis.
well, one thing is sure, Andrew, that if natural mechanisms cannot account, first of all, for the origin of life, it cannot account for the split of the three domains of life. There is no relationship between bacteria or prokaryotes and eukaryotes, and there is no explanation of the transition from unicellular to multicellular life. There is
Oh,
no
really?
explanation of the origin of photosynthesis. And if you object, I would leave that homework for you. Check out how is it possible that signaling networks between two cells and adhesion molecules could emerge simultaneously, because that is what you need right from the beginning to start to go from unicellular to multicellular life forms. You need both. How do you account for that with evolution?
I don't know. Let me research it.
Yeah. So, Andrew, it's almost 1 hour and a half that we have
Yeah.
had this conversation, and I had over an hour with speed, so I wanted to end the stream.
Yep.
But I left some question marks in our conversation, and you can look it up, like the um, regulation of the cell cycle. Look it up if you find answers about oxygenic photosynthesis, how it evolved, how the transition from unicellular to multicellular organisms evolved, and we can follow up on these conversations.
Yep, sure. Thanks for having me on and letting us talk about this. I know or it may have gotten heated and we may have disagreed on it, but thanks for the
No,
discussion.
not at all. I try to keep it calm and relaxed. I don't think it's necessary to get heated. Of course, if you disagree, you can become heated, but that's okay. That's normal.
Yep.
All right. Okay. So thank you, everyone, which has followed our conversation. See you next time. Bye bye.